What's up, everybody? This is Charlie Potter, senior team writer with BamaOnLine.com, joined as always by Jimmy Stein and Blake Byler. And happy bye week to all that celebrate. I know some people probably aren't celebrating. They're probably unhappy that you don't have Alabama football on this weekend, but it's kind of crazy, guys. We're already at week 4. Once you get to that first game and I'll do all that waiting all off season long, it just starts to roll. So, Jimmy, how have you been spending the bye week so far?
I've actually done a little more relaxing, watching a little more TV, a little tiny less football. But now with the football weekend coming up, I'm going to be into it again big time. I'm sure I'm not as excited about the bye week as Blake. Blake's got bye in his name.
That's true. Have you been enjoying the bye week, Blake Byler?
Yeah, it's been nice. It's kind of a little slower on our end. Nice to kind of catch our breath after a road trip, a long road trip. I guess technically a short road trip, but a long way for me. And I had that early flight on Sunday morning, so it's been nice to catch up on a little sleep and relax a little. But like Jimmy said, getting ready for this weekend. We got a good weekend of football, even though Alabama's not playing. It'll be a fun weekend with a lot of other stuff going on around the country.
It's funny because the wife and I were having breakfast in Milwaukee, and we were sitting there like, Blake's probably already back home by now. So it's pretty funny. But we'll actually talk about that just briefly. No FOMO, Jimmy, but how did you enjoy being in Madison for all of 36 or less hours?
No, I mean, it was cool. I liked what I got to see. I wasn't there for that long. My flight landed on Friday night really late, and so then we got up early. I met Charlie and we drove over. We stayed in Milwaukee, so we drove from Milwaukee to Madison, got to see kind of the landscape. We got to take whatever interstate that was and drive it for about an hour. Saw whatever we did of the Wisconsin campus. It was pretty up there. I never got the chance to be up in Wisconsin before, so that was cool. And then obviously, the stadium was cool. I always like getting to see new stadiums, see how they're formatted, the student sections like, everything like that. It was interesting. You had kind of a late arriving student crowd for that game, which I think was partially because it looked like the ushers or the security, whoever, were like lining them up, and they were going single file into the student section, which isn't how it is at Alabama. They just kind of rush down wherever. So it took them until a couple minutes into the game to get packed out, and then they left early. But jump around was cool. And it's always cool to see a new stadium, especially up in Big Ten country. So definitely a good trip overall.
No, I enjoyed it. And Jimmy, I'm sorry to disappoint. I did not drink 1 million beers, but I had multiple a day. And that's what it felt like up there. It's just beer drinking country. I know you and I can really respect that. But
there's some sort of spotted cow bragging about up there. Did you sample this?
Yeah, I thought of that to Tim on Tuesday on our big show. Everyone was just like spotted cow, spotted cow, spotted cow. And sometimes when you get that, it doesn't meet expectations. It's a damn good beer.
Really?
It's solid. It actually, they had it at the airport on the way out. You could buy a 12-pack. And I was like, well, if I didn't already have a personal item and a carry-on, I could slip some,
It doesn't
back home.
sound like
it doesn't.
Because
but it's
not like you see a spotted cow on the side of the road and went, boy, I want a beer.
Honestly, I thought it was going to be more like a stout or something like that, maybe more creamy, but I think it's just a lager. So it's ice cold was real nice. It was a good weekend. I think it was a lot of fun. I think a lot of Alabama fans enjoyed the trip up there. Just looking at, Instagram and stuff like that, some of the people that I know that went up there. And so I think Wisconsin will enjoy their trip back to Tuscaloosa next year. But let's just, not talking about spotted cows and things like that. Let's talk about the game itself, put a bow on it. Just kind of wanted to get your biggest takeaways, each of you, from the game on Saturday. And Jimmy, since you weren't there, what was the biggest one for you?
I'm probably stealing it from you guys. And I know y'all were there and weren't subject to the Fox broadcast, but I'm kind of riffing off Joel Klatt here, who could not stop really salivating over Jalen Milroe. I mean, and to me, Milroe was the biggest takeaway, just a reminder of how dynamic he is. They give the Heisman the most outstanding player in college football. I'm not saying that Jalen is that guy. He's got a lot to prove between now and then, but he made a case Saturday for why he should be considered one of the most outstanding players in college football. He's just so difficult to defend. I thought it was maybe his best 60 minutes when you factor in the touchdown throws were fantastic. I mean, those were big time throws, all 3 touchdowns. And then, of course, he made a lot of plays with his legs. He did not turn the ball over. He was on the road in a difficult environment. I think when you factor all that in, that was an impressive performance and a reminder that Jalen, if he does end up a Heisman finalist, he's not there because a bunch of Alabama fans voted on a website. I mean, he is truly one of the most dynamic talents in the game. Now he's got to prove it 9 more times.
Yeah, I think what does he have? 14 touchdowns for the first 3 games. He's been electric, and I think if he can build on this and have a big game here in 2 weeks against Georgia, certainly, I think at the very least he'll earn a spot in New York, and I think it was a solid game for him. I think my big takeaway. I'm going to jump in front of Blake here because it's a nice segue. My big takeaway is that he had a lot of time to orchestrate the offense. I think the offensive line played really, really well. It looked better, and it was the first time we saw the starting group that maybe some expected for the season opener. So I think having time in the pocket, not facing as much pressure as he did the previous week, speaks volumes to his performance. And I think they gave up just a pressure to the starting 5, having Caden Proctor there at left tackle. Having Elijah Pritchett after that solid closeout to the South Florida game at right tackle. I think it really solidified that group. I don't think either tackle, according to PFF, and we kind of take that with a little bit of grain of salt, but they didn't give up a pressure in the game. I think that group, if they can continue to build on this performance, can be one of the best in the country. So going back home and playing in a more friendly environment, I guess, for an offense, I think will be big. And, they're going to have a challenge coming up this week, but I think it was a big, building block for this offense and for this team, going into the first bye week. So maybe I didn't steal yours, Blake, but what was your big takeaway from the Wisconsin game?
No, you did. I mean, the offensive line, a lot of questions were answered that we wanted to see. And we talked about it on this show last week, how we hadn't seen Caden Proctor play yet, and we hadn't seen what was going to happen with right tackle. But since you just talked about that, I'll go in kind of a different direction. I thought it kind of stood out the way that Kalen DeBoer and Nick Sheridan and this offense are playing to their strengths, which that strength this year has been the run game. And that's what we expected it to be going into the season with. We already knew, regardless of who was going to start along the offensive line, you knew this was a good run blocking unit. And on top of that, you had a really good running back duo in Jam Miller and Justice Haynes. Plus, the question was kind of how was Jalen Milroe going to be used in the run game? And so far, we've gotten our answer with how Alabama's going to be heavily favoring the run game in kind of its run and pass splits offensively. And in this game, Alabama threw the ball 22 times and ran the ball 34 times across its 56 plays, which is not a lot of plays. Alabama has not had a lot of offensive plays ran in a lot of these games, probably because they're scoring the ball so quickly. But Alabama and Kalen DeBoer isn't trying to force Jalen Milroe to throw the ball 35 times a game like he would have with Michael Penix at Washington, because he knows what Jalen Milroe's strengths are. He knows he's a really good runner, and that's why he ran him 14 times, and Milroe had 14 carries. Probably 10 of those were designed runs to either side and getting his legs involved. And so I think it's encouraging and exciting to see that this offensive staff clearly knows what the strengths of this football team is, and they know that the run game is effective with both running backs and with Jalen Milroe, and they're going to utilize that as a part of, not just a part, but the main part of their offense, and not force Jalen to be something he's not. And I think, yes, he threw the ball really well on Saturday, and those deep balls were fantastic, but that's also one of the strengths of his game. And everybody talks about, what about the intermediate throw, and what about the 15-yard pass over the middle? We haven't really seen that, but we also know that that's not really him. And I think DeBoer and Sheridan and the entire staff, they're not going to try to force something that isn't what his best strengths are. And he may develop that over the course of the season. But for right now, what we've seen, Alabama's playing to their strengths, and that's exciting.
I don't think it's something that they're not going to do. I think that also it's early. we've talked about it quite a bit this week. Hearing from the assistant coaches, hearing from Kalen DeBoer, just how much has Alabama shown. They've got bigger fish to fry later down the road, and I think they're saving some things, and that's to be expected. But we all kind of talked about the offense. I want to get your guys' thoughts quickly before we move on here. Just what you saw from the defense on this past Saturday. What did you think, Jimmy, just from a what stood out standpoint?
Well, first of all, just the score. I mean, points are how you decide who wins and loses the game. I think giving up only 10 points in Wisconsin Stadium, I think it's the worst that they've lost a home game since something like 08.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that is due to Alabama's defense keeping them out of the end zone. I know losing Tyler Van Dyke so early in the game, no doubt that affected things. No doubt it's not a Colt McCoy situation, but no doubt that affected Wisconsin's ability to complete a lot of passes. But they still run the ball well. That's a good offensive line. I don't think we've paid enough attention. That's a little bit of my fault, really. Their offensive line's good. Now, I'm sure Alabama's going to see some better ones, like maybe LSU, probably even Georgia, even with Tate Ratledge out. But that's one of the better offensive lines Alabama will see all season. But they still defensively did enough to keep them out of the end zone. Look, if you told me before the game Wisconsin was only scoring 10, I'd have told you Alabama was going to win comfortably. So the defense did a good job of keeping them out of the end zone. Now, there are things they need to work on. We'll talk about that more in the show. It wasn't perfect, far from perfect. But overall, hey, when you only give up 10 on the road to a Power 4 team, that's real. Frankly, it's just outstanding.
It really is. Yeah, I thought the defense for the most part played well. I think Kane Womack is still not fully pleased with the run defense, and I think that the more this team plays together, and even whenever they get everybody healthy, I think it'll be a little better. But they're gonna face some tough challenges here coming up. And before we put a complete bow on Wisconsin, Blake, you and I talked about it in the press box. I know you wrote about it this weekend on Sunday. Just James Burnett, man, hell of a game for the Aussie. What do you think about how he looked in Madison?
I mean, he was fantastic. He showed that he has improved so much from the time he got to Alabama. It's incredible to see kind of the jumps that he's made each and every year that he's had as a starter. I think every time he punted against Wisconsin, there was an audible reaction in the press box, like, oh, wow, because of how, where the press box was, like the ball was getting eye level with us where we were sitting almost with the hang time he was getting on some of those punts. And he had one that was 64 yards, and that was one where Alabama went 3 and out deep in their own territory on like their 20, and he punts at 64 yards, and then Wisconsin gets it on their own 15. And so that kind of flipping of the field is huge, especially when you get in some of these games where Alabama's not late in the fourth quarter up by 30, but rather every possession has a little more weight to it. Sending out your defense with kind of a hyped up crowd with Georgia, for example, pinned back on the 10 versus Georgia fielding a short punt and getting the ball at the 40 after a 3 and out. That's a world of a difference. And that can be the difference in a stop that can win you a game. And I'm not saying every punt's going to be game changing, but there are ripple effects that can come from a good punt and a punt being down inside the 20 or a field flipping that really can't even be quantified. So the way he played earned him a shout out from Kalen DeBoer in his opening statement on Monday morning after the game, where he wasn't even asked about it. He got asked about him later, but kind of unprompted. Kalen DeBoer was like, yeah, James Burnett was really good on Saturday. He's a weapon. And he is. Alabama, I don't really think has had a punter this good and this much, somebody able to flip the field this much since J.K. Scott.
No doubt. Yeah. Game changer. That's what Kalen DeBoer described him as. So I think he's played well, and he's going to be in the mix for the Ray Guy Award, which I know some Alabama fans are still salty about that J.K. Scott never won that one. So moving on to the bye week, Alabama's off this week. They actually haven't practiced a full-on practice yet. They'll be on the field on Thursday. This is actually coming out on Thursday, so they're probably off the field already. But when we look at this bye week, guys, what is maybe at the top of the to-do list if you're Kalen DeBoer and this staff in your eyes? Jimmy, I'll start with you.
Run defense. I think it's the number one thing that needs to be shored up. Look, sometimes it's great. I mean, the weird thing is defensively, sometimes against the run, they're pretty spectacular. It's on some tackles for loss. In the Wisconsin game alone, it's so weird. A lot of runs for no gain. They were so close to racking up at TFL, but the statistician or whatever ruled that, hey, well, it got back a lot of scrimmage. There's at least 5 or 6 times I'm like, that's a lot. They literally lost yardage, but they're not giving that to us. But that was a fantastic performance at times at the line of scrimmage against a good offensive line. But then you get, gashed a little bit on some plays. I thought too many times Wisconsin made too many yards between the tackles. And we're coming off a game where South Florida rushed for 200 yards. So the run defense, I'm not saying it's a gigantic issue. I'm not saying they're terrible. They have a lot of success, but it's not good enough. And listening to Kane Womack, I think he agrees. It's just not good enough yet.
Yeah, that was mine too. And it's a situation where I wonder in this game, how much did what they expect to do change whenever Tyler Van Dyke left the game? Not saying they're just going to be, completely air raid or anything like that. They're not going to throw it 50 times a game, but I wonder if they went in with a different plan and maybe it got altered a little bit. That's not really an excuse. It's just me spitballing here because I think that the run defense, like you said, it's been good at times, but it hasn't been great. I think they've given up about 130 or 132 yards on the ground per average each game. That's 12th in the SEC. Now, there's some teams that haven't played anybody yet, so their stats are a little padded just in terms of where they rank in the SEC. But going against a Georgia team, even though their offensive line's a little banged up, Georgia likes to run the football. They like to have a balanced approach on offense. And their team, they're not great. What did I write down here? They average 145, 146 on the ground, but they average more than 5 yards per carry. So those like chunk plays, those explosive plays, you want to eliminate those, going into this game against Georgia and beyond. I mean, hell, Tennessee ran the hell of the football this past week. So it's a situation where they have what they need to clean up. I think that and just sustain drives and running the football goes hand in hand with that for an opposing offense. So, yeah, if you're Kane Womack, it's pretty clear that they're doing a lot of things well, but if you can eliminate some of these explosive plays on the ground, I think this defense could be really lights out. So I piggyback off what Jimmy said. That's what I wrote down. I wrote down some numbers. When I do that, I can't stray away from it. So Blake, hopefully you have something else that you have on your to-do list.
Yeah, I think this is something that's not what we've seen, but more of what we haven't seen, I would say, on both sides of the ball. And we heard Kane Womack specifically address this on Monday, that Alabama's defense, there is a lot of the defense that they haven't shown and that we haven't seen. And I think it's safe to say that also applies to the offense when it comes to the type of creativity, when it comes to design plays, design runs, whatever it may be that Kalen DeBoer has in his bag that Alabama hasn't put on tape yet, because quite frankly, they haven't needed to. Whenever it comes to Western Kentucky and South Florida, you could get away with a pretty vanilla game plan offensively. And then with Wisconsin, the game was out of hand fairly early, so you didn't really have to dig into your bag of tricks, so to speak, for anything wild. But coming up, you've got Georgia, of course, and then you've got some other tough SEC games down the line with Tennessee, who's knocking on the door of being ranked in the top 5, and Missouri, who's right there, and LSU. So I think this is it's hard for us to quantify, really, because we don't know what we don't know whenever it comes to the schemes defensively and offensively of what we haven't seen. But I'd imagine, especially since Kane Womack mentioned it, that's going to be a hefty chunk of what this bye week and this preparation entails, is installing and kind of perfecting and tweaking the last little bits of things that they haven't actually put on the field yet.
Yeah, and I think those comments by Coach Womack and Kalen DeBoer were interesting because it made its way to the BOL roundtable, the message board of choice for Alabama fans, and I think some people just saw the snippet of what Kalen said. And I'm going to read it just for clarity's sake. He said, there's going to be a lot of our offense that we never install this year just because of the players that we have. There's going to be other elements of the system that we haven't used as much maybe in the last few years that we will go draw upon. And that, to me, I don't understand why that drew such a reaction, because he said that in his opening statement when he was introduced back in January. They're a coaching staff and an offensive staff that plays to their personnel. They mold things to the players they have. Any good coach worth his salt does that.
Yeah, that's a
So
good thing.
it's a situation where I think sometimes with DeBoer, he answers things in as a positive way as he can because he doesn't tip his hand too much. And I think some people just thought that was an indictment on Jalen Milroe or maybe somebody else, maybe the offensive line. But I think it's just what they've always done. So I don't take too much into that. I know it's kind of straying away from the point, but I know that was on the round table. And Jimmy, do you have anything to add to that? Looks like you got something.
I do. When he said those words, I mean, my interpretation, riffing off the old Travis Reier, what he said and what we think he means. When he said that to me, I mean, that to me was just another way to say Michael Penix and Jalen Milroe are two completely different guys.
Absolutely.
So we did one thing with Penix and we're doing another thing with Milroe. And an oversimplification is last year we ran a ton of RPOs at Washington, and the RPO really came down to, do I hand it to Dylan Johnson or do I throw it to Roma Dunze? And this year our RPO is, do I hand it to Jammer Justice or is Jalen just going to keep it? And that's an oversimplification, but it's really just Kalen DeBoer going, we're not going to run the Penix offense with Jalen, just like we didn't run the Jalen offense with Penix. The best coaches build it around what they've got, and so far, so good because the offenses look really good with what they're doing, and they're going to build on it from here.
Well said. Well said. So with that, we're going to move on to next week's game. We got a little bit of time before the Georgia game, so we're not going to spend a ton of time here. We're not going to get too deep into the weeds because we're going to do plenty of that next week, and really as the week progresses here. But just a on the surface look at Georgia, I think for me, not even looking at the game, I think just the availability of players is really fascinating right now because we kind of mentioned it already, but Georgia's going to be without right guard Tate Ratledge, who had surgery on his ankle, and that's that tightrope procedure. And it seems like those have gotten a little more lengthy just in terms of return time. I feel like that used to be just a quick, Alabama player gets hurt against Tennessee, you miss the bye week, and then you're back for LSU. So it sounds like he's going to be out for about a month, and you don't really know the severity. Obviously, everything's different, but that's a big blow to Georgia. And for Alabama, you had 3 guys go down in this past game, and I kind of fumbled the bag there in the post-game press conference. Couldn't remember Richard Young. Sorry, Richard. But I think the 2 big ones, and I'm going to do it here too, is the 2 big ones are Quay Russaw and Malachi Moore, because Quay went down with a lower extremity injury. It sounds like it's both an ankle and a knee, but it's not something where he tore anything. So that's positive. And Malachi's in concussion protocol. And whether it's Kalen DeBoer, even his mom, Pimo, they've been very positive about where things stand with him. So I think it's something we're going to continue to watch. But just from a bye week standpoint, it comes at a good time for Alabama. And Jimmy, I rolled over to you because I know that you watch a ton of football. Just with this Tate Ratledge injury, just what do you kind of expect from a Georgia offensive line and offense with that being such a big blow?
Yeah, 2 things. Number one, we saw that when Alabama lost a guy like Caden Proctor, it did create some issues.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Alabama's offensive line didn't play that great in game 2 against South Florida. You're really missing one guy. I know Pritchett was banged up, but we saw it have a real on-field effect. So I'm expecting there to be a problem for Georgia. Having to go to the bench and not having their 5 best guys. And Tate Ratledge is an outstanding player. He's not just a starter. He's outstanding. Even in the preseason, there was talk, who's the best guard in college football? If it's not Tyler Booker, it might be Ratledge at Georgia. So, I mean, this is a really good player. But it's Georgia. They recruit well. They didn't have their head coach retire last year and have as many portal issues as maybe Alabama did. Georgia can replace Tate Ratledge better than, let's say, just picking a team. If Tate played for Arkansas, they'd be in big trouble up there. But Georgia, has an assembly line of players. They're not going to put a bad player on the field. They won't. But, hey, we saw it create problems at Alabama. So this is definitely something that's in the plus category for Alabama, is not having to deal with Tate Ratledge, who's a real talented kid.
And then for Alabama, switch over to you, Blake, with both Quay and Malachi, dealing with injuries. Just what did you see from the guys on Saturday that stepped in? And I think Malachi right now, a concussion, you got to be careful with it. But it sounds like he'll probably be back. But with if Quay is going to miss the game, just what do you see from that Wolf position and maybe where Alabama stands?
I think the Wolf position is somewhat deep because, I mean, even in the first game of the season, that first depth chart that got released, Alabama had 3 co-starters at Wolf with Quay Rousseau and Q Robinson and also Keanu Coop. So Alabama has guys that can play if Quay Rousseau isn't able to go, but obviously Rousseau would be a loss. He's been really good this season, but I think Q Robinson has been equally as good, especially when it comes to pass rushes or rushing the passer. I think somebody said a stat, I don't remember who it was during the press conference on Monday, asking Kalen DeBoer, and said that Q was averaging a sack every 10 dropbacks that he's in for, or 10 rushes. So he's been incredibly effective rushing the passer. I don't really know how. We haven't seen him on the field for a lot of rushing downs, a lot of early first and second downs. So we don't really know how he would handle those types of situations. But I think as far as that Wolf room, there are guys that the coaching staff trusts. I think it would be a lot more problematic if Malachi Moore weren't able to go on the back end, because then you even saw on Wisconsin's touchdown drive that happened whenever Malachi Moore came out of the game. For that injury, because you had some shuffling around. You moved Devontae Smith from Husky back to safety, which led to putting Red Morgan in at Husky. And also Malachi Moore is not only a captain, but a leader, somebody who gets everybody aligned, that makes sure everybody's in the right place. And his play has also been fantastic this season, and he was having a really good game against Wisconsin. But if you have to do some shuffling around at safety, if you have to play Red Morgan at Husky, you have to play Devontae Smith out of position. That could cause some problems, especially with how Red Morgan has kind of been in coverage so far this year. And he's a young player. He's still learning. He really likes to go hit people, which is really fun. He loves to get up in there for run fits and things like that. But as far as getting beat over the top, he's gotten beat a couple times this season against some not great quarterbacks. And so if he's in there against Carson Beck, an accurate, good thrower of the football, I would bet Georgia's going to be planning on targeting him, and you've got a quarterback that can connect if he does get beat. So obviously we don't really know, one, if Malachi Moore is going to miss. It sounds like he is on track to being able to play based on what we've heard from Coach DeBoer and from his mom and things like that. But I think him missing would be a little more worrisome than if Quay Rousseau has to miss.
Yeah, I think Red Morgan, it's a good point that he's a willing hitter, but he's still a young guy, you can tell in coverage. And we'll see how that plays out. I think having Malachi, you're right, would be huge. And you're right about Quay Rousseau. I looked it up. He's had 29 pass rush reps, 6 pressures, 3 sacks. That'll play. So I think with this game, I know it's still early, but Jimmy, just what are your early thoughts on this matchup, and what's maybe something that you'll have your eye on as you start to dive in deeper?
Yeah, I think this is a game where Jalen Milroe is going to make some throws. He's going to make plays with his arm, and I can assure you Carson Beck is going to complete some passes on this young Alabama secondary. I think it's just a given that both of those quarterbacks will make plays with their arms in this game. But I really feel like the winner of this game is going to be the team that runs the ball best on the other. And if Georgia has a ton of success, now they're not going to do it with Beck. They're going to do it with their backs. But if Georgia can run the ball and have a lot of success, and there are questions about this Alabama rush defense, but if Georgia can do that, it might be a long day for Alabama, and vice versa. If Alabama with Jalen Milroe, Justice Haynes, and Jam Miller have a lot of success on the ground, Georgia's in trouble.
No doubt. And we'll get out of here on this because we're approaching that 30-minute mark. Bless you, Jimmy. The Alabama coaches they've done this since Nick Saban was the head coach, but you look ahead a little bit in the bye week. You start to look at things that maybe you haven't seen yet that are going to be something you face down the road. So what do you guys think? I'm going to think we might be in unison here, and that's fine. You don't have to get crazy with it. But what do you think is the toughest non-Georgia game remaining on Alabama's schedule? I'll start with you, Blake.
It's Tennessee. We all know it's Tennessee. Like that team up in Knoxville has been really good to start the season, and they've started 3-0. They're scoring 1 million points a game. They were up like 60-0 at halftime or something, playing Kent State. Now, Kent State's bad. But even the week before that, they went and played an NC State team who people expected to be good. They're probably worse than people thought they were going to be going into the season, and beat them 51-10. But also, I think this week will tell us a lot about what Tennessee really is going into Norman for a huge game, a primetime game, the first really good defense that Tennessee's seen. But everyone knows when Josh Heupel has a good quarterback, things are going to happen offensively. And Nico Iamaleava has been really, really good for them so far, and he's got a pro-style body. He's got a great arm. He is kind of the total package at quarterback. We've just got to see him do it against a real defense because he hasn't gotten the chance to yet. And then their defense has also been really good. So if you combine a Josh Heupel offense with a good quarterback and a good defense, you've got a really good football team. And then you combine that with the fact that Alabama's going to be going on the road in a very hostile environment on top of Tennessee's strength being passing. Alabama's got the youngins on the outside. You've got guys who are inexperienced. That's a very scary game looking forward, just with how dominant Tennessee has looked so far. And we could look up in 3 weeks and Tennessee could have lost 2 games and it might not look as bad. But as of right now, that's definitely the most challenging game outside of Georgia looking ahead.
Look at you with the pronunciation. That was smooth. I think too, like, obviously the Wisconsin game was the first true road test. And I think we kind of talked about it. As soon as Tyler Van Dyke went down, it kind of took the air out of the stadium, the air that was in there, at least, because like Blake mentioned, the students were late arriving, or at least late trickling in. But the Vanderbilt game, God bless them, but that's going to be a home game for Alabama. Going to Knoxville, though, that's going to be a big test for this offense, for some of these young players on offense. And I think with Tennessee, they've been very balanced, but they've also just ran the hell of the football. And what we've talked about already, if Alabama can't clean these things up, then it could be a long day in Knoxville. So I think that's the toughest one. Are we in unison here, Jimmy? Do you agree?
Definitely. I have a lot of respect for home versus road. And, I've even changed my mind. I mean, all spring and summer, I'm like, Georgia's going to be, I know it's home, but Georgia will be the toughest game on the schedule because they have the best 22. I don't know, the way Tennessee's playing, I'm not so sure that at Tennessee might not even be a little tougher than Georgia. Again, that's not a statement at all about how good Georgia is. I know how good they are, but boy, that game at Tennessee looks really tough right now. And, they're going on the road this Saturday night against Oklahoma. We'll get an even better idea there, but I think I know what's coming.
Quickly, as we get out of here, another pretty solid slate of games. Week 4 this weekend. Jimmy just mentioned the Oklahoma and Tennessee game. I know a lot of eyes will be on that. So, Blake, what's the game that has your interest the most this weekend?
Very interested in that Tennessee-Oklahoma game, as we've mentioned, but since we just talked a lot about Tennessee, I'm also interested in Auburn's game against Arkansas because, we just saw Auburn last week against New Mexico switch starting quarterbacks. They benched Peyton Thorne, starting the redshirt freshman Hank Brown. And Arkansas isn't as much of a pushover as maybe we all thought going into the season. A lot of people expected them to be kind of right there at the bottom of the league, but then 2 weeks ago, they went on the road and almost should have beat Oklahoma State if they didn't choke the game away in the fourth quarter and in overtime. And Oklahoma State is one of the favorites to be the Big 12 champion, and they might be the favorite if they beat Utah at home this weekend. So you've got an Arkansas team who is a little better than people expected at home, and it is a must-win for Auburn as far as their season is concerned because they already took the home loss to Cal. So if Auburn starts with 4 home games and they start 2-2 with losses to Cal and Arkansas, things are looking really bleak. But if they go and they win or even win convincingly in this game, then they know that they found their quarterback, and that sets up for a monster matchup the next weekend against Oklahoma. So this is kind of almost a season-defining game here in Week 4 for Auburn because a win versus a loss could send their season on entirely different trajectories after the Cal loss, and the quarterback situation has kind of got them at a crossroads.
What about you, Jimmy?
Yeah, Blake said it really well, so I won't go too in. To me, Auburn and Arkansas is super interesting. That game looks so different today than it looked in May, June, and July, primarily because of the quarterbacks. To me, I mean, who who would have said back this summer that Hank Brown would be Auburn's quarterback in this game? And Taylor Green, man, he's super capable, super capable. I mean, Auburn better not be sleeping on this. Hey, Arkansas winning Oklahoma State, who was ranked in the top 25, and pushed them for 60 minutes and beyond. I guess it's easy to say on the Alabama show that Auburn's not as good as Oklahoma State, but that would be my opinion. I mean, Auburn can change my mind on Saturday, but I don't know that Auburn's any better than Mike Gundy's top 25 team. So I think it's going to be tight, and that quarterback battle is something else. Taylor Green's going to make plays, especially with his legs, against anyone. He reminds me a lot of former Arkansas quarterback Matt Jones, very similar to tall, super explosive with his legs. But when you over defend the legs, he's got enough arm to make a play. So, I'm really interested in Auburn, Arkansas.
I think for me, I'm fascinated by Florida State. Is Florida State going to start 0-4? Are they going to lose 5 straight games since getting left out of the playoff? Like it sounds impossible to say out loud, but I mean, Cal beat Auburn at Auburn. That's a tough place to win. And so I know it's been kind of entertaining to watch on Twitter. We'll see. We'll see if we have anybody come out of the woodworks and eat some dog poo. But it's been a lot, man, and I think that's a good way to end it. So, guys, enjoy your bye week. Thanks for everybody for tuning in. If you haven't already, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. We enjoy doing this, and we'll be back next week. It's a big one, folks. And we're going to have plenty of content and coverage. So stay tuned to here on YouTube and, of course, at BamaOnLine. And until then, we'll see you next time.